Can y'all hear me? Is that good? Whew. This is scary. Just saying. Okay. Hello, I'm Karen. I'm a grateful believer in Christ, and I battle against depression, anxiety, perfectionism, PTSD from childhood trauma, suicidal ideation, and low self-esteem. My testimony has not been an easy thing for me to do. I have spent my entire life burying things and just trying to be perfect for everyone and everything, all the while falling apart. Through therapy, I have learned to begin at the beginning. My first memory of life has always been sketchy. There are days I remember how life was before I was 6. I remember my dad laughing, and I remember camping trips. And although we were poor, I remember things as being normal, or what I thought was normal. Things were happier then. To understand me, you need to understand my father. He and his brothers were put up for adoption at the age of 2 and 4 because his birth mother did not want her children anymore. The Boats family adopted them because they thought they could not have children. And 6 months after the adoption, his adoptive mother became pregnant, and the only child she ever wanted was Eric. My father and his brother were abused, ignored, and neglected. At 14, my father left home and never returned, and his one goal in life was to have a family and to have fun. He met and married my mom within 6 weeks, and his goal was to have children and lots of them. Jay Lee calls us the Dirty Dozen. He never thought about how to support them or what it meant to be a father. Family was important to him, the actual physical family, but not the healthy and loving type of family. When I was 7 years old, my dad's brother and his wife came to live with us. They had only been there a few weeks when I woke up to him molesting me. I have blocked out a lot, but I still remember him calling me, "Hey little girl, do you want some airline peanuts?" My brother was asleep in the room, and I don't know what woke him, but he began screaming for my parents. I really don't remember anything after that. I just know they were gone the next day. My being violated by my dad's brother shattered his world, and my dad's undiagnosed mental illness took a very bad turn for the worse. He attempted suicide by drinking acid at one point. Things had never been normal, but after this, there were never any happy times. I remember fights, and as a child, my mom taking us places to hide from my dad when he was in a bad way. We spent weeks, one time living in our pastor's garage, hiding from my dad because he was so unstable. For 3 or 4 years, my parents were separated, and when dad would show up, things would get tense and violent. I can remember hiding from him and knowing once he found me, it would be bad, and they always ended up getting back together. Over the years, things continued to get worse. Before my molestation, my dad always called me Care Bear, and he loved me. I remember riding bikes and him playing with me outside, and that all ended. I was never called Care Bear again. I felt like I was to blame for his world falling apart. But more than that, I realized that if you pretend to be happy and things are great, and if you're good, like really good, and do everything people ask of you, then life is more peaceful. My dad was always quoting scripture, all the while being a violent, abusive alcoholic. He would go on about how he and his house would serve the Lord. So I grew up believing that God was this angry and violent God. If my dad followed God and he was this angry, then God must be too. The only way I knew how to deal with anger was to be the perfect child, so no one would get angry with me, and so I was. Dad decided when I was 8 that the air in Texas was killing us and that we needed to get away, and we moved to Arkansas. By this time, there were 5 children. We moved to a little place called Sims, and we lived in a 2-room shack with no running water, and we had an outhouse. We had no windows, just plastic over the windows. There are things that I love about the 3 years that we lived there. I loved the freedom we had to roam the mountains because we weren't stuck inside the craziness of our home. Dad was still unpredictable and violent. He rarely worked, there was never enough food, and hungry was rough, and I know there were many times my mom would not eat so everyone else could, and there was never any money. We never had good clothes unless my grandparents bought them. We never had friends over because who wants to show your friends the outhouse and no running water? And I can remember as a child when the propane ran out, my dad would announce that winter was over and we would get used to the cold. My dad's main goal in life was to have this big, happy family and to have fun. That is all he wanted. He never paid attention to the things that were dangerous and made everything out to be a big game. There were at least 2 times we had to be rescued by the National Forest people, whatever they're called, because we got lost in the mountains on hikes. We also almost drowned because he thought it would be fun to float a flooded river. He did not see that we were neglected or hungry. He only saw things through the eyes of a very damaged little boy who thought having fun was more important than life's necessities. There were 5 kids in one room and my mom got pregnant again. I can still remember the stress on my mom's face, but my dad didn't get stressed, he got drunk. In the 12 years of living with him, I knew that we were not allowed to drink out of his cup because it always had some sort of alcohol in it. I'm not sure what changed for my mom, but I do know the final fight was over $700. She had just had a baby, number 6, and the church we were going to took up a love offering to help with expenses. Dad took the money and spent it on a vacation package to Arizona. His plan was to drive a car with no air conditioning in July to the desert and camp with 6 kids, one that was 5 weeks old. They began fighting and it soon got bad. We had already packed to go on vacation, and I remember grabbing our family picture and sticking it in the trunk because I just knew at that moment everything that I had known in my life was over. Mom loaded all of the kids into the car and we began driving without Dad. She stopped in Hatfield, Arkansas at a friend's house who was a pastor, and we stayed a day or 2, and the pastor called my dad and had him have a marriage counseling session with my mom. I decided to stay behind and not go to Texas. I'm not sure what happened. My mom never stood up to my dad. All I do know is that whatever happened in that car, my dad violently attacked my older brother. My mom stopped the car and made him get out. After a few days, my mom returned to Arkansas. We went to our house in Sims and we loaded up all of our belongings and moved. No one ever talked about what happened, and no one ever explained to me what was happening. My mom filed for divorce at this time, and I was 12 years old and became the caretaker of all of my siblings. Mom was working and going to college. I cooked, I cleaned, I got the kids ready for bed, I did their homework, and I got them up the next day for school. I wrote all of their notes for school, and Mom's signature was never on anything. I was a substitute mom at 12 years old, and this went on for about 2 years until my mom graduated college. I still kept up with most of the cooking and housework because my mom just wasn't about that kind of life. My dad would pop in and out of our lives. He would stalk and follow my mom for years. I was constantly on guard and once again protecting and taking care of everyone. I learned the best thing I could do was to be the perfect child to ease my mom's stress, and I've never been able to shake that. I always do what is expected of me. I try to be perfect and not cause any stress or harm to anyone in my life. I strive for perfection. By the 7th grade, I was on medication for depression and anxiety. By the 9th grade, I had developed an eating disorder where I allowed myself 10 to 15 crackers a day. And I worked out tirelessly, all the while smiling and taking care of my mom and siblings so they would not have to worry. By 15, I had moved schools to help with my depression. The school that I had been in was very cliquish. They were only people who had lived there forever, and I was different, and I was poor, and my mom was an unmarried mom of 6 kids, which made people treat us terrible. I had no friends. They were not accepting of outsiders, and we were considered weird. They ignored us or made fun of us by not only our peers, but by our adults. I was completely alone, so I talked to my mom into letting me move schools. What I found was a group of people who were a lot like me, broken homes and poverty, a lot of drinking and a lot of partying, but I felt included, like I finally belonged somewhere. For the first time, I had friends and I longed to be included. I did everything that people expected of me. I became the perfect drunk party girl, and by the time I was 16, I was pretty much drunk every chance I could be. At 16, I began dating someone who was very cruel and manipulative, but I wanted to be loved, and for a year, I did whatever he wanted until he got tired of me. I did not understand why or what caused him to not want me, but I assumed it was because I was not good enough. I just knew that we were going to get married, so when he found someone else, I felt used and worthless. This began another downward spiral of drinking and being with men who were way too old for me. They just saw a pretty drunk girl and they took advantage of that, and I once again became whoever they wanted me to be. I was raised in church. No matter where we lived, we went to church. My dad and mom both made sure of that. And if we didn't like a church, my dad would create his own. And so I had a very messed up view of what church was. When I was 16 and I began drinking and sleeping around, I knew that I was going to hell because that's what I had been taught. I had been taught that from an early age: you sin, you go to hell. Every choice I was making was a sin, so I knew that there was no hope for me. I was 17, very drunk, when I met my last boyfriend who became my husband. I would love to say it was love at first sight, but it wasn't. We were set up on a blind date and began dating soon after that. For the first 6 months of our relationship, I knew that if his son's mother ever wanted him back, that he would have to get with her. So being the type of person I am, I said okay, and proceeded to do everything I could to be his perfect girlfriend so he wouldn't leave me. My husband is an amazing man, and he never knew that that hurt me, but I had only dealt with abandonment and low self-esteem, and I always felt like his second choice and that I would never measure up. This led to years of me feeling like I was less than everyone. And if he could just see how perfect I was, then he would want me. When I was 18, we were engaged and I found out I was pregnant. We got married because that's the right thing to do, and 2 months before my 19th birthday, our first daughter was born. Miss Madison Lee saved me. Up until the point of my getting pregnant, I was very self-destructive and drinking more and more until Jay Lee finally put his foot down and said no more. When I got pregnant, I finally felt like I had something that was all mine, someone who would love me and who would always choose me. Madison was born 6 weeks early and weighed 4 pounds. She was born with a condition called fibular hemimelia, which means she was missing her fibula. We do not know what caused her condition, but I felt a huge amount of guilt because I felt I had done this to her. My lifestyle, medications I was on, or maybe God was punishing me for my choices. All of this was so much to try and deal with, but I never told anybody I needed help, that I was scared and unsure of what to do, and I never asked for help. I was the one who helped others. So I shoved those feelings down, put a smile on my face, and made sure everyone thought I had it all together. At age 19 and 21, Jay Lee and I had to make a very grown-up decision to have Madison's leg amputated. She was 9 months old, and I can remember feeling so alone. Even though I was surrounded by my mom, mother-in-law, and sister, I always felt like I might be making the wrong choice. But I went on acting perfect because that is what is expected of me. I had to be the perfect wife and mother, and by this time, I had a full-time job and I was in college. It was 2001 and I was 21 when Shay Baby was born. I had graduated college and was working for a church. I lied to get the job, which is kind of ironic because for the next 16 years I only worked for churches, and most of the time we didn't even attend a church. But I let them believe that I was a super active churchgoer and super involved, but in reality, the only time that I was in church was while I was working. Funny how God used someone like me in ministry for so many years when I felt like a complete hypocrite. Shay Baby was our only planned child. This was going to be our final baby, and we were excited. I, of course, was continuing to be the perfect mom and wife, juggling a 4-year-old, a job at First Baptist Church, keeping the perfect clean house, doing everything. And I was pretty much a single parent because Jay Lee had to work off, because we all know how work is around here. When he was home, I did not want to burden him with my insecurities or my troubles. I wanted him to think I was perfect. And this was the life we built. Jay Lee is the hardest worker I know and one of the strongest people I know. And he doesn't show weakness, and therefore I felt like I could not, because I wanted him to be proud of me. I was very alone, but I poured myself into my job and my children, and I loved it. I volunteered for school functions and began my journey as a youth pastor. I was the perfect employee, perfect youth pastor, and only one time did I let my fake drop. I fell apart in front of the pastor that I worked for, and he tried to get me to talk, but the last thing I needed was to look weak or not perfect. And so I just told him it was pregnancy hormones, because by that time we were with our little surprise blessing back there. 2001 was also the year that my dad died. I was 7 months pregnant when I received a call from my dad. Through the years, our contact would be sporadic, but after Madison was born, Dad would call and come to visit. He even drove to Shreveport for Madison's surgery, and he was so proud to be a grandpa, and I was awful to him. I still blamed him for my being molested and for the years of turmoil that we had lived through, and for not taking care of us like he should. He had come to visit, and we had gotten in an argument about, of all things, him creating a web page with my kids' pictures on it, and now we have Facebook and I share everything. But at the time, the internet was unknown, and I felt like he was putting us in danger. Dad called me to apologize, and I could hear in his voice, he was so sorry. And I knew he was not just apologizing for the website, but for everything. He finished the call with, "I love you, Care Bear." And I responded with, "Whatever, Dad," and I hung up on him. And he died the next day. I never dealt with the shame or the guilt, ever. I moved on like always, the perfect example of how to be when your dad dies, the perfect employee, mother, and wife. And we had our surprise blessing with Levi. Still not sure how that boy is here, but I cannot imagine life without him. At this point, I had a 6-year-old, a 2-year-old, and an infant. Jay Lee worked off. I worked full-time, and I was a volunteer youth pastor. I was also exhausted because Levi never slept, ever, for like 4 years. What I did not realize is that my depression had spiraled after giving birth, and I had undiagnosed postpartum depression, and I didn't even know that that was a thing. I know that I cried all the time, and I felt like a failure because I did that. One day at work, I could not function. I left and said I was sick. This was my first plan of suicide. I went home. Madison was at school. Shay and Levi were at my mother-in-law's, and I got home. And we had a handgun. And I sat in my bedroom crying. And I cried for so long, just knowing that in an instant I would feel better, and that my family would be better off without me. And then the front door opened. And Madison yelled, "Mama, the school didn't have electric," and we got to come home. That night I had Jay Lee take the guns, and I never explained to him what I was feeling because I didn't want him to think less of me or feel that I was a terrible wife and mother. I never realized that my striving to be perfect at everything would actually be damaging me. And for the next 10 years, I rocked it. I was the perfect everything. I was not about to let my depression get to me, so I kept putting everything into boxes and putting them on a shelf. I stayed busy because that's what I do. I don't deal with things. I find some way to stay busy. I kept my brain focused on everything and everyone around me. I did everything that was asked of me, so I didn't have to look at the ugly things in life. For 10 years, I went through the motions of the perfect person. I never said no, I volunteered, I stayed busy, and I never thought about my past. I thought that I was leading by example and that I showed how strong I was. Probably the most difficult thing I had ever been through as a parent was when my daughter's best friend took his own life, and Madison then struggled with survivor's guilt. I can remember not sleeping for months because I would get up and check to see if she was still alive. I can remember every morning that walk down the hallway to wake her up and bracing myself outside her door for what I might find. My life began to revolve around Madison and making sure she was safe and mentally healthy. I fought for her because I'd never had anybody fight for me. The biggest regret I have of this time was I neglected my two youngest children. I was so involved with everything Madison was going through, I failed to see my younger children were hurting. And I passed on one of my worst traits to my daughter, Shay. I passed on the trait of the need to be perfect and not cause anyone any hurt or stress. Shay would not tell me about things about being bullied at school. And I can remember years later, Shay and I talking about the things during that time and asking her why she never told me she was being bullied. And she said, "You had too much going on." And so my sweet Shay baby suffered in silence, all alone. She poured herself into being the best big sister to Levi and became his second mom, a lot like how I'd done with my siblings. She kept my house clean when it needed it and was always striving to be perfect. She never showed sadness or anything because she didn't want to hurt me. I put this in a box and stored it away, promising myself I would never miss anything her or Levi did again. I became the perfect sports mom, never missed a game or school activity. I dropped everything and still do when they need something, and did everything I could to give them the best of anything that they could want. I was the perfect mother and wife at all cost. 2014, I began working at the Choctaw Nation Men's Recovery Center. And like with everything else, I made sure I was perfect at everything, always doing what I needed to. I did other people's jobs constantly, helping whenever we were shorthanded, not to mention pouring as much love and support to my clients as I could. Madison was off at college, Shay was graduating high school, Levi was 16 and acting like it. Levi was going through a lot at this time, and I was doing everything I could to keep him safe. At 37, the first part of my crumbling began. My mom, my best friend, the one person who was constant in my life, was diagnosed with terminal cancer and given 3 months to live. I have never been good at making friends or being close to people, but my mama was everything to me. I took care of her my entire childhood, and this was the one time I could not do anything, and I couldn't make her well. She battled with colon cancer for 3 years, and I held her hand and promised I would take care of everyone and that it was okay to let go. My best friend was gone. Jay Lee decided to stop working and stay at home when he was tired of the travel. This was a huge adjustment. That's probably why we've been married so long, because he stayed gone for 20 years, because I'm crazy. The kids and I were used to us being just us after 20 years, and this was hard. Our income was cut in half. We had to learn to live together all of the time, and apparently we both get on each other's nerves. Shay was graduating and off to college, and we had to come up with $1,000 each month in tuition. So I then started a business because I didn't have enough going on. So here I was, 39 years old, working full-time in a high-stress job, starting a business, working an extra 2 or 3 nights a week, volunteer youth minister, wife, and mother. I was wearing myself out and didn't even realize. I just kept pushing and making sure everything was perfect. And then 2020 hit. My business suffered. Shay was struggling with life as a student during this time. Levi was struggling as a student during this time. All of their hopes and dreams were over, and I could not fix anything for them, which is what I had always done. Church shut down, work was a ghost town, and I couldn't paint. I couldn't stay busy. And remember, I needed to stay busy because when I'm not, those memories would return. And boy, did they come flooding back. I'm not sure why, but those memories resurfaced, and I had no defense mechanism or coping skills. I had no one to ask about them because they were all gone. I hated reaching out to family because I was the perfect sister and granddaughter, and I didn't want to hurt or upset anyone by asking. I tried to go to my pastor at the time, but ended up having my confidence and confidentiality betrayed. I was an emotional wreck. My marriage was falling apart, and I felt it was all my fault. I love my husband, but I felt completely alone. I never asked for help because that would show weakness and imperfection, so I kept it all to myself. I was not easy to live with. Part of me was very angry and resentful toward him because he did not see me struggling, so I began to withdraw from him. At this time, I really let my children down, or at least I felt like I was. Levi is so much like me, and we constantly battled, both wanting to be right and neither one wanting to back down. I always felt that I was too hard on him and expected too much from him. What I didn't realize is I was trying to make him be another me, and he would never be that, and I would never want him to be. April 30th, 2020. I decided one Sunday to go drive to where my dad is buried. And I was going to hang myself. I got there, and the day was beautiful. I cleaned his grave, and I sat there and cried for hours. And no one even realized I was gone, which fueled my reason to die. And then Shay called. Once again, my children saved me. I laughed it off when she asked me where I was. I told her I just took a drive, and she said, well, you need to get home. So I bottled everything up and went home. I stayed withdrawn and quiet. I just ignored my husband and continued to be the best mother I could be. The only people in my life who could see me falling apart was Ben and Toby. And that's probably why I'm still here. They listened to me and checked on me. I guess life began to wear me down and began to show in my physical appearance because Jaylee finally asked me what was wrong, and I just let it out. All of it, all the hurt I had been holding on to, and I was awful to him. I told him, you're the person who's supposed to love me most, and you couldn't even see me, and you didn't see I wanted to die. I told him that I wanted a break from him in our life, and I broke his heart. I could see it, and I felt like the most cruel and horrible person I could ever imagine. So once again, I put it all in a box and ignored it. I had ruined our perfect life. I had let him down. I was a failure. So I began forcing myself to be happy and smile, and I became once again what I had always been before. I planned a trip to save our marriage and did everything that was expected of me. And for a while it worked, but you know what happens when we keep putting things in boxes and placing them on a shelf. Eventually that shelf cannot bear the weight anymore and it breaks. But I have to say, he never gave up on me. He is the strongest person I know, and he still is. Jaylee suggested we find a church to go to because through all the years of our marriage, that was important to me. But he wanted to try and make things better. And since I had messed everything up, I needed to fix what I had broken. So we started looking for a church. I had been in some form of ministry for 20 years, so church seemed like a good choice. We began attending the Cowboy Church. And like always, I got right to work being busy and pretending everything was perfect again. I'm very good at pretending. It's easier to seem perfect, to try and be perfect, because then everyone around me is happy and satisfied. I was always the first to volunteer and to do whatever is asked of me, just stay busy. Get the approval of everyone around me so they could not see the reality of me being someone who was falling apart. I constantly tried to prove I was strong, a good person, a perfect person who was worthy of love and acceptance. December 2020, My brother died by suicide, and I could not cope. I promised my mama that I would take care of everyone, and within 3 years, her baby was gone. What's so hard about losing Scott was I was the one who knew after picking him up from his attempt in November that he would try again. And he took his own life, and the guilt was all consuming. I was close to being hospitalized because of my brokenness, defeat, depression, and suicidal ideation. I began counseling. I could not go one day without not wanting to die. One would think seeing the pain that my brother's death caused would snap me out of it, and I guess it did somewhat because I could never put my kids through what I was going through. But that did not stop the thoughts about hurting myself. There were days that I would see an avenue to death in so many random places. It is unreal the attack that will come against you when you were suicidal. It screams so loudly in your head that there were times when I could not move. And then TJ suggested Celebrate Recovery. At that point, I thought it was just for those struggling with addiction and regaining your sobriety. I never realized that it was also for people like me, those who were barely hanging on to life, and those who could not see past their own brokenness. I began CR in January, and this journey God has me on. Wow. It not only saved my life, because the darkness around me was so great, but it restored my faith in a loving God. It actually made me realize that God was not angry with me, and that He loved me. My entire life, I have taken care of and loved everyone that I came in contact with. I am very good at loving others, but I have never felt chosen or that I measured up. My life's goal was to always make sure no one ever felt like me, unworthy or unloved. I never wanted anyone I met or came in contact with to feel that they did not matter. So I worked and I worked to prove my worth. I could love others without question about their past or their choices, but I could not love myself. It seems that all I ever wanted in life was to be chosen by someone, and somehow I thought to be chosen I had to be perfect. Celebrate Recovery has opened my eyes that loving others is great, and that is the key to what God has asked us to do, but we must realize that we are worthy of that same love. Principle 2 says that we earnestly believe that God exists, that I matter to Him, and that He has the power to help me recover. I am 43 years old and realizing that I matter to Him, that He loves me in spite of all of my hurts, hang-ups, and habits. I don't have to work myself to where I'm completely empty and exhausted, that He chose me for this life, that I am loved beyond measure, that all my busyness was just keeping me from a true relationship with Him and those that I care the most about. This world is great at reminding us of all the things we are not. It shows us repeatedly that I will never measure up and that we don't matter. But God says that is my child, and I chose her and I love her. I will never be the perfect wife, mother, or church person. I am going to fail. I am human. I can embrace that now. And although I'm still growing and learning, I'm beginning to be okay with not being perfect. I'm completely overwhelmed by how amazing my family is and how strong we've overcome the last few months. They have loved me through all of this, and they never gave up on me. Romans 8:35, 37 through 39 says, "Can anything ever separate us from Christ's love? Does it mean He no longer loves us if we have trouble or calamity, or persecuted, hungry, destitute, or in danger, or threatened with death? No, despite all of these things, overwhelming victory is ours through Christ who loved us. And I am convinced that nothing can ever separate us from God's love. Neither death nor life, angels nor demons, neither our fears for today or our worries about tomorrow. Not even the powers of hell can separate us from God's love. No power in the sky above or in the earth below. Indeed, nothing in all of creation will ever be able to separate us from the love of God." I call my struggles by their name. We must give a name to our brokenness. Just like a doctor gives a diagnosis on how to treat us, we must name our struggles so we can begin to heal. That freedom in saying what we struggle against is so powerful. It no longer has the power to destroy me, but instead shows me how powerful God is. I will never forget this awful time as I grieve over my loss, yet I will dare to hope when I remember this. The faithful love of the Lord never ends. His mercies never cease. Great is his faithfulness. His mercies begin afresh each morning. Lamentations 3:20-23. I am Karen. I'm a grateful believer in Christ. I battle depression, anxiety, perfectionism, PTSD from childhood trauma, suicidal ideation, and low self-esteem. But God says, my God, says I'm a chosen race, God's own possession, a child of God, holy and blameless in his sight. In love, he predestined us for adoption through Jesus Christ. He has redeemed me, and he has called me by name. And he says, you are mine. And though I have been shaken by life and experiences, Isaiah 54:10 says, though the mountains be shaken and the hills be removed, my unfailing love for you will not be shaken, nor my covenant of peace be removed, says the Lord. Ephesians 3:18-19 says, and may you have the power to understand, as all God's people should, how wide, how long, how high, and how deep his love is. May you experience the love of Christ, though it is too great to understand fully. Then you will be made complete with all the fullness of life and the power that comes from God. Thank you for letting me share.